Get started with the UK elections. Just hours left before people across Britain cast their votes to elect a new government and Prime Minister. The United Kingdom voters will cast their ballots in a national election on Thursday, the 4th of July, passing judgment on the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's 20 months in office and on the 4 Conservative Prime Ministers before him who have been in power over the last 14 years. Almost every opinion poll suggests Sunak's Tories are headed for a wipeout and the voters are set to elect a Labour government. But Sunak, who has been in office since October 2022, has been putting up a rather brave front. During a hectic final 2 days of campaigning, the Prime Minister insisted that the outcome of this election is not a foregone conclusion. People can see that we have turned a corner, he said, adding, it's been a difficult few years, but undeniably things are in a better place now than they were earlier. But even a last-minute pep talk at a Conservative rally on Tuesday night by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who led the party to a thumping win in 2019, seems to have done little to lift the party's mood. Conservative Cabinet Minister Landslide has said it looks like Labour is heading for an extraordinary landslide. The Labour Party has warned against taking the election result for granted, imploring its supporters not to grow complacent about polls that have given the party a solid double-digit lead since before the campaign began. Labour leader Keir Starmer has spent the 6-week campaign urging voters to take a chance on his centre-left party and vote for change. While Labour doesn't quite seem to have enthused voters with its pledges to get the sluggish economy growing, invest in infrastructure and make Britain a clean energy superpower, the election does seem to be in the bag for the party, going by forecasts. Labour has won the support of large chunks of the business community and endorsements from traditionally conservative newspapers, including the Rupert Murdoch-owned Sunday Times. As for the Tories, not only are they haunted by 14 years of anti-incumbency and public anger over the skyrocketing cost of living, handling of the economy and the issue of immigration, several Conservatives close to Rishi Sunak are also being investigated by the gambling regulator over suspicions that they used inside information to place bets on the date of the election before it was announced by the Prime Minister. This has made it a lot harder for Sunak to shake off the taint of political chaos and mismanagement that the Conservatives have faced since Boris Johnson and his staff held lockdown-breaching parties during the COVID pandemic. Johnson's successor, Liz Truss, rocked the COVID-weakened economy with a package of drastic tax cuts, making a cost-of-living crisis far worse, and lasted just 49 days in office. There is widespread dissatisfaction over a host of issues, from a dysfunctional public healthcare system to crumbling infrastructure. But for many voters, the lack of trust applies not just to Conservatives but to politicians in general. Reform UK party, headed by far-right leader Nigel Farage, who's often described by his critics as a rabble-rouser, is also in the race. Farage has often grabbed headlines and voters' attention with his anti-immigration rhetoric and xenophobic rhetoric as well. The centrist Liberal Democrats and environmentalist Green Party also want to sweep up disaffected voters from the bigger parties. Across the UK, voters say they want change but aren't very optimistic. Labour leader Keir Starmer has acknowledged that his biggest challenge is the mindset in some voters that everything is broken and nothing can be fixed. He said recently, there is a sense of mistrust in politics because of so many promises having been made over the last 14 years which weren't carried through. We have to reach in and turn that around. Many election experts expect a low voter turnout below the 67% recorded in 2019. Yet, this election may bring a scale of change Britain has not seen for decades if it delivers a big Labour majority and a diminished Conservative party. All right, let's now go across to my colleague Kabir Naqvi, who joins us live from London. Kabir, tell us, what is the mood like as the UK gets set to vote? Is there enthusiasm and excitement amongst voters, or do you, on the contrary, sense some kind of disinterest and disenchantment?
Well, you know what, Neha, a very good evening first and foremost. Three main candidates that people are talking about here. Of course, Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. But Nigel Farage and his role, it cannot be undermined. I'll tell you what, some of those key issues that I've been speaking to people all across and a massive overseas community over here as well. We're trying to understand and take a look at what's the most important issue at this point in time. Number one, there's fatigue. It's clear cut. I've been feeling it all across. It's been 14 years of the conservative rule and people seem to be fed up. They want some sort of change, and change has been, used in various ways across, newspapers, people throwing banters at each other. But Reform Party, the UK Reform Party, what their role is going to be, we'll have to take a look at as well. The economy, the housing crisis, the homelessness, that seems to be plaguing the streets, not just of London, but of Birmingham as well. I was traveling across the streets of Birmingham, trying to assess what people want to know, what people want to see. You couldn't walk 5 minutes without somebody asking you for money. That's how bad the situation is. And they're all mostly Britishers. Now, the Labour Party manifesto promises more hefty, stricter laws on immigration, a revision of the immigration list as well. But, let's just talk to some more people here, understand what they have to say as well. I'm joined by this young, college-going boy. His name is Adil. Adil, many thanks for joining with us here. You're being streamed right back to India, back home. What's the situation at this point in time? What's the most biggest issue, especially for you students? Are you thinking about, the change in the political spectrum over here?
I mean, see, we're sick and tired of the fake notions and the fake promises that the politicians have been putting up for the past couple of years. Whether it's the Conservative, whether it's the Labour, we actually, it's a big problem for us because instead of providing a stop to the cost of living crisis, the economy is such that it's providing an impetus to the cost of living crisis. And the amount of working hours that we get, they're not that great. The opportunities are less. So it's very difficult for a student from coming abroad and staying here and have nothing in hand. I mean, it's really difficult. Whether it's the Conservative Party, whether it's the Labour Party, that's not a bigger question for us. It's like any party who is willing to support us, or probably anybody who comes out from a different country over here, should get a chance to be at the parliament and should work for the welfare of the people. Because, I mean, if you talk about the Labour Party, if you talk about the Labour Party, I just feel that the manifesto suits our particular requirements a little bit better than what the Conservatives are doing right now. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's just a big hassle for us to be out here and just living out with this little means that we are able to get for ourselves.
Right.
And a lot of students here, Neha, it's not just this one young gentleman here, a lot of students over here that do not want to go back home, Neha. They do not want to go back home, but they're scared about what's going to happen if the government does change. Taxation is going to go up the roof, but will the benefits really trickle down to the bottom? That's the big question.
All right. Certainly, it looks like it is going to be a very difficult election for the Conservatives. Some reports even seem to suggest, Kabir, that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is worried that he may not be able to save his own seat in what, looks like it could well be a Tory wipeout. Thanks very much, Kabir, for getting us all those details from London. We, of course, will continue to track this story with you. Before we slip into a break, let's listen in to what Conservative leader and the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, the man who is expected to replace him as Prime Minister of UK, Labour leader Keir Starmer, and former Prime Minister and Conservative leader Boris Johnson had to say in the run-up to tomorrow's election.
Look, there is a challenge in the NHS, and one of the areas we haven't made as much progress as I would have liked is on tackling NHS waiting lists. Children, as you've heard me talking about, are really important to me, and making sure they get the support they need is vital. So one of the things that we're doing, before I get into the macro stuff, you said you chose to go private. Right? So one thing we're actually doing now is making that available on the NHS in more and more areas, because I don't have any ideological disagreement with the private sector, the independent sector providing NHS care. Right? There's again a difference between me and the Labour Party. So what I've told the NHS is, look, if there's a private provider that can do the thing, whatever it might be, whether it's an assessment or a hip replacement, and they can do it at the same tariff rate that we have, the price, then people should be able to choose where to get their treatment and get it done there. So now, if Gracie or your son or anyone else, or you've got ear infection, sore throat, sinusitis, you don't need to see your GP anymore. You don't need to sit there and wait for that appointment. You can just go straight to your pharmacist and get the medicines that you need there and then, and we're going to roll that out to more. It is challenging for the very simple reason that we had a pandemic where, I'll give you this one number, 6 million referrals for treatment didn't happen during the pandemic. 6 million, right? And that's what we're catching up with.
About the postal ballots, because it is really important in this election that every single person has the ability to vote, and I hope vote for change. And so I think it's on all of us, on a sort of non-party political basis, to say we must do everything we collectively can to ensure that those ballot papers get to people and they can fill them in and have the vote to which they are entitled, so that the country can move forward with the change that I hope will be delivered at this election. We can hardly believe that 48 hours before an election, the Conservative Party has got nothing positive to say as they go into this. I've been arguing throughout this campaign, you'll have heard me many times saying they haven't changed, they're just the same, nothing's going to change. And they're proving it, because they are not saying, look, if you vote Tory, vote Conservative on Thursday, these things will happen. They're just in this negative, desperate loop. And it is really desperate. My family is really important to me, as they will be to every single person watching this. And I just think it's increasing desperation, bordering on hysterical now.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी 9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
(2024) sees India's hottest May in 36 years.
Heat waves are becoming stronger.
Heat wave kills at least 56 in India. Nearly 25,000 fall ill.
Working in the heat is impossible to survive that heat for a long time.
Indian cities aren't even cooling at night.
People who are not even getting 5 sips of water now.
It's so hot that even ACs are exploding.
This is a health emergency.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. All of America, and indeed the world, has been discussing and dissecting the Trump-Biden debate for days now. Most, including scores of Democrats, are of the opinion that President Joe Biden's performance was an unmitigated disaster, one that dealt a massive blow to his re-election bid and the Democratic Party's prospects in the high-stakes US presidential election this November. Having faced relentless scrutiny since then, with many questioning his cognitive abilities and readiness for another term in the White House, President Biden has blamed his poor debate performance on jet lag. He told reporters that he wasn't very smart for traveling around the world a couple of times before the debate. He stated, and I quote, "I didn't listen to my staff and then I nearly fell asleep on stage." It's not an excuse but an explanation. He also apologized for his performance and said it was critical that he win the upcoming election. White House officials have previously said he was battling a cold on the day of the debate. During last Thursday's debate, Biden appeared disoriented and confused and often sounded incoherent, repeatedly losing his train of thought and struggling through many of his responses. at some points even talking gibberish. Many say the debate crystallized the fears of Democrats about Biden's prospects and played right into Trump's claims that his rival is weak and mentally diminished. Can his argument blaming jet lag really help Biden's rapidly weakening case? Remember, he last returned from travel on the 15th of June, nearly 2 weeks ahead of the 27th June debate. For his part, Biden has vowed to stay in the race and insists that he is still up to the job and ready to take on and defeat Donald Trump. Is he though? It's not only Republicans and ordinary Americans who are raising questions over his mental fitness. The president's own party has been in panic mode since debate night, with many privately discussing if it was time for Biden to do the unthinkable, step aside and make way for a better Democratic candidate, for the party to have a chance at salvaging its electoral prospects. But the trouble for Biden is no longer confined to hand-wringing within the Democratic ranks behind closed doors. A congressman from Texas has become the first sitting Democratic lawmaker to call for him to step aside. Representative Lloyd Doggett has issued a statement saying, and I quote, "I'm hopeful that President Biden will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw. Instead of reassuring voters, the president failed to effectively defend his many accomplishments and expose Trump's many lies." Doggett says too much is at stake to risk the president losing to Trump over fears about his age. He added, President Biden has the opportunity to encourage a new generation of leaders from whom a nominee can be chosen to unite our country through an open democratic process. While many prominent Democratic lawmakers have voiced their concerns about Biden's age and stamina, this is the first time someone has called for him to step aside. One of President Biden's most important backers, Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, has interestingly and significantly said he would support Vice President Kamala Harris as the party's nominee if Biden stepped down. Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, told a news channel that the debate had created a difficult situation. He said, "There are very honest and serious and rigorous conversations taking place at every level of our party." Reports suggest many top Democratic Party figures are now asking for more openness and details on the president's health and mental state, as the anxiety about his re-election campaign seems to have evolved into an increasingly genuine threat to his grip on the Democratic nomination. Democratic Senator Peter Welch from Vermont has said, "The big question going into that debate was the age question. The outcome of the debate is that question about Biden's age has now intensified." Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi couched her comments by saying Biden is a great president, but added, "I think it is a legitimate question to ask. Is this an episode or is this a condition?" Illinois Representative Mike Quigley has said, "We have to be honest with ourselves that it wasn't just a horrible night." President Biden clearly has to understand that his decision not only impacts who is going to serve in the White House for the next 4 years, but also who's going to serve in the Senate, who's going to serve in the House, and it will have implications for decades to come. Another House Democratic lawmaker has been quoted on condition of anonymity as saying, "There is a large and increasing group of House Democrats concerned about the president's candidacy. We are deeply concerned about his trajectory and his ability to win. We want to give him space to make a decision about quitting the race, but we will be increasingly vocal about our concerns if he doesn't." Many supporters of the Democratic Party say the comparison between the wise, sober and statesman-like Biden and the wild and lawless Trump has been obliterated by speculation over Biden's health and cognitive decline. Biden needed to use the debate to turn around a race he was already in danger of losing, and he may now have squandered his best chance to overtake the former president. That is the worry many Democrats now have. In a new effort to calm public concern, Biden will give an interview to ABC News on Friday. And today, he is scheduled to meet Democratic governors in Washington, both in person and virtually, following demands for direct contact. But will any of this help? A new CNN SSRS poll shows that 3/4 of Americans believe Democrats would have a better chance of beating Trump with a candidate other than Biden. And even otherwise unpopular Vice President Kamala Harris fared better in the matchup with Donald Trump than her boss, trailing by 47% to 45%. Biden is down 6 percentage points to the former president. And there are also names of some Democratic governors doing the rounds as possible candidates, one of whom could replace Biden as the party's presidential nominee. The question is this: can Biden still come back from a series of recent disasters, perhaps none worse than his debate performance? Or are we going to see more and more Democrats exert pressure on the president to step aside for the larger good of the party and the country, as they put it?
A lot of history this week. I think the debate last night, the reverberations from that will continue, and I think it will have a big effect on our ability to fix the country. Why? Because I think that this will help ensure that Donald Trump is elected president in November, that we take back the majority in the Senate for the Republican Party, and that we grow the House majority for Republicans here. Democratic Party. I would be panicking too if I were a Democrat today, and that was my nominee. I think they know they have a serious problem, but it's not just political. It's not just the Democratic Party. It's the entire country. We have a serious problem here because we have a president who, by all appearances, is not up to the task. And these are very dangerous times. This is a very serious moment in American history, and it needs to be regarded and handled as such.
The American people saw what a lot of us have been seeing, those of us who follow politics closely, is that the president's just not capable. We have 7 months remaining in this term. It's a dangerous world. I don't believe that the president that we saw last night is capable of exercising the duties as commander-in-chief. I think most people, if they're being honest, would agree. And I think, therefore, we should call on the executive branch to do that. Now, obviously, the vice president has to act. American people, and I just don't think that the individual that we saw on the stage last night, that the president of the United States is capable of carrying out the duties. I think it's that simple, and I think Congress has a duty to make that statement and force consideration of that, and then the vice president will have to make her own determination.
What I can say is that, just to take a step back, it was a bad night. We understand that it was a bad night, and the president has spoken to this, and he understands that. And so I cannot speak to anything beyond what I just shared. The president has regular annual physicals that we release in a thorough report. We're going to continue to do that. I don't have anything else beyond that.
All right. So what do these developments mean for President Biden and for the Democratic Party ahead of the November election? Let's discuss this with our guest. Joining me on the show tonight is Pramit Pal-Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Analyst at the Eurasia Group, Professor Sanjeev Srivastava, also Foreign Affairs Analyst, and Ambassador S.R. Tayal, former Indian diplomat. A warm welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Pramit Pal-Chaudhary, if I could begin with you. Last week, when you were on this show, I asked you if you believed that after the disastrous performance during his debate with Trump, Biden was going to be forced to actually consider stepping aside. You were of the view that that was nearly impossible given how little time is left between now and the Democratic National Convention and the US presidential election. While your view may not have changed in the past few days, a lot seems to have changed for the Democratic Party and for President Biden. Now, as we know, Representative Lloyd Doggett has become the first Democratic lawmaker to publicly ask President Biden to step down, saying there is just too much at stake to risk the president losing to Trump over fears about his age. President Biden has the opportunity to encourage a new generation of leaders from whom a nominee can be chosen to unite our country through an open democratic process. While this Democrat has come out in the open and asked for Biden to quit, there are many who have been saying, according to multiple reports behind closed doors, that they are extremely worried and they believe that Biden must make way for another candidate. Therefore, my question to you is, how do you think things are likely to pan out for President Biden over the next few days? He is going to be meeting Democratic governors tonight. He is scheduled to give an interview to ABC News on Friday. Do you believe that will be enough to put to rest the growing concerns, not just about his age and cognitive ability, but his candidacy itself?
So on the first thing, I don't think my position has changed. You can't force him out. There's no procedure to do so. It's as simple as that. The Democratic Party convention, it is not the Democrats in the Senate or the House that decide who is the next presidential candidate. It is the convention. The delegates in the convention are pledged to a candidate, and the majority of them are pledged to Biden. Under their own rules, the Democratic Party delegates cannot vote for anybody else except the man they have pledged to. He has to be the man to make the call. If he says, I open the convention, my delegates pledged to me can vote for anybody they want, then it's an open convention. Second, or he decides that he just announces, as Lyndon Baines Johnson did once many years ago, that I choose not to run. At which point he then again, almost by definition, the convention becomes open. It is the convention that matters. It is not the statements of congressmen or senators. So the game is right now, for those who think that he should step down, to pressure him to agree to step down. And that we don't know yet, because his family and his closest aides seem to still believe that he should run. Now, obviously, what we're going to be seeing is an attempt to salvage his candidacy or his position within the Democratic Party more than anybody else. The interview that he will hold on Friday with ABC television. He's also said that he's even prepared to hold another debate in September, but that would be too late because the convention is obviously in August. So we'll see, I think, a last-ditch attempt by his core group to try and salvage his position and show that no, what happened in the debate was just a bad day, and therefore he's perfectly coherent other days. But so far, the evidence is that he's not coherent. And we saw, for example, he campaigned soon after that debate, and while there were points of where he was coherent in his statements, other times he wasn't. So we'll see what happens after Friday. But my guess is that yes, the Democratic Party leadership and many Democratic voters, you see in the polls, 30 to 40% of Democrats believe that they need to get another candidate, believe this, but he has to make that call. And at present, there's no clear evidence that he is prepared to do so. And so far, the people who he takes the most seriously, Ron Klain, his chief of staff, Barack Obama, who spoke to him, and so on, have basically said, we're with Biden. We know what's happened, but we're with Biden for the time being. We're not changing our view. So Biden is he takes his friends very, very seriously. He's very close to them, as you would, as a person of his age and generation would. It's only they who can really bring him around, in my view, to the idea of stepping down. And so far, they're not giving him that message.
Okay, very interesting. Talking about his cognitive decline, it wasn't just during last Thursday's debate. As you mentioned, just in the last 48 hours, President Biden has made multiple gaffes while addressing rallies. You know, he was reading off a teleprompter, ended up saying words like, end of quote. Say that again. Again, these are issues that are being pointed out repeatedly by his critics and by the Republicans and causing considerable concern and panic in the Democratic ranks. Now, so far, President Biden is putting up a brave front, saying he will stay in the race, but could things change in the days ahead? We'll look at that in greater detail on the other side of this quick break.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
This is News 9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News 9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
why is the government lapping up gold is really a $1 million question that nobody perhaps can point a finger on. But clearly the geopolitical situation isn't very conducive that countries are banking on each other.
Get ready for another 40% rise in India's gold reserve in next 10 years.
And why we are being called as golden sparrow? Because people have understood this in 1000 BC, 2000 BC also, that it's the easiest method to store value.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing whether US President Joe Biden will continue to stay in the presidential race or whether he could in fact face enough pressure from within his own party in the days ahead to step aside. Let me go across to Professor Sanjeev Srivastava at this point. Professor Sanjeev Srivastava, we've quoted Representative Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat who has publicly urged President Biden to step aside and make way for another Democratic candidate so as to give the party a fighting chance in the upcoming election against Trump. But it is believed that there are many who have expressed a similar concern and desire behind closed doors. And quickly, for the benefit of the viewers, I want to quote, some of the other Democrats on this issue. Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, he's believed to be one of the most loyal supporters of President Biden. He has actually said he would support Vice President Kamala Harris as the party's nominee if Biden decides to step down. Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, has said the debate last week created a difficult situation for the Democratic Party, and there are very serious and honest conversations that are taking place at every level of the party. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, one of the most respected figures in the Democratic Party, has said, I think it's a legitimate question to ask about President Biden's health. Was this an episode or is this a condition? Then there is the Illinois representative, Mike Quigley, who's said we have to be honest with ourselves. It wasn't just a horrible night. President Biden has to understand his decision not only impacts who's going to serve in the White House for the next 4 years, but also who's going to serve in the Senate, in the House, and will have implications for decades to come. My question is that ultimately it may be for President Biden to decide whether to step aside or not. And for now, he's vowed to stay in the race. Do you believe in the days ahead there could be enough pressure exerted on President Biden from within his own party to actually quit the race? Because while publicly Barack Obama and many others continue to support him, I think it is pretty safe to say that there is a lot of hand-wringing going on behind the scenes in the Democratic Party. They are worried, they're nervous, and they believe that if they go into this election with President Biden as their nominee, the election is as good as over for them.
Well, Neha, first of all, a very good evening to you, to my fellow panelists, distinguished panelists, and to all the viewers. First of all, I would say, Neha, that it is ultimately, it would be the decision of President Biden himself, whether he decides to put himself aside or he will continue fighting and he will contest this election. And ultimately, that decision will be taken by President Biden himself, and no one can force him to put him aside. And there has been a convention, and I think Democratic Party, a very well-established party, and has a great reputation, not only in the United States of America, but in the whole world, in the international community, that they take a decision based on the various conventions they have set for themselves. So this is first point. The second point, Neha, I would say that when President Biden decided to go ahead with this second term nomination and contest, then I think he has taken this decision based on very serious and all considerations about his health, about his competency, etc. And with regard to the competency, with regard to the experience he has, I think he has no match, I would say. From 1973 onwards, he has been a senator of the United States of America Senate till 2009. And after that, he was vice president for 2 terms, and then he has completed now his nearly completed the first term of his presidency, and he has fulfilled all his responsibility with great conviction, with great hard work, and in this process, he has attained enormous amount of experience, which has been quite visible throughout his presidency when he took decisions regarding Ukraine war, when he took decisions regarding the Israel's support in their war against terrorism, on various domestic front, whether it is economy or abortion or healthcare or education or gun control laws. You have seen his speeches. It has been a very determined, very well articulated speech. And not to forget that recently when he delivered his State of Union address, the last State of Union address, it was taken very well by every member of the United States of America's Congress. And I think that demonstrated that his ability to perform as president is very well there, and there should not be any question. In my assessment, Neha, what has happened in the first presidential debate, it was an episodic development. It is not a condition. I'm sure about it. I think had there been such concerns about his own competency, he would have not taken that decision to go ahead with the second nomination. And he has been he knows what kind of responsibility, what kind of pulse and pressure a president goes through, which is in other words can be called as the most important position in the international community. And when he has decided to take on with the and go ahead with the second term, he would have given all considerations about it, health factor, etc., apart from other considerations. Third point, I would say that he is competing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, obviously, because of several reasons at this point of time in various opinion polls, he is doing very well. And what reports I get and whatever my assessment is, I think he is performing at this time a lot better than the incumbent Joe Biden. But as far as the health is concerned, and as far as the age is concerned, he is not far behind. If President Biden is 81-year-old, Donald Trump is 78 years old, and such kind of questions can be raised about Donald Trump too. But no, he is determined. Donald Trump is determined to fight for the second term, and so is the President Biden. So I think there should not be any serious questions at this point of time to be raised about the competency of President Biden. Now, last point I would say, Neha, that next 10 to 15 days will be very crucial for President Biden. He has to perform well in the various interviews, the various kind of public interactions he will have, and through his very good performance, a very good episodic performance in the next several interviews and interactions, he can put aside those questions which are being asked by the various quarters within the Democratic Party or elsewhere. So I think the coming interactions, his public interaction, his speeches, etc., are going to be very crucial, and he has to do well. He must do well in order to stay in this fight.
Okay, you see, I think what we have to remember is that ultimately it's not really for you and me to decide whether he is mentally and physically fit to be president for another 4 years or not. It is for the American voters to decide. At the end of the day, what American voters think is what counts. And at the moment, it is very clear that there is a widespread perception across the United States of America, including among Democrats, that President Biden has shown multiple signs of cognitive decline in recent days, weeks and months. And of course, that debate last night, for many proved to be the last straw on the camel's back. And, you know, I don't disagree with you when you talk about his competence and proven track record as a president. But unfortunately for President Biden and the Democrats, that does not seem to be the issue any longer. It's all about his age and cognitive abilities. And there seems to be a big question mark hanging over that. And those concerns are not going to go away so easily. Let me go back to Pramit Pal Chaudhary at this point. Mr. Chaudhary, you know, earlier I quoted this poll. I'd like your thoughts on this. This new CNN SSRS poll that shows that 3/4 of Americans believe Democrats would have a better chance of beating Trump with a candidate other than Biden. And even otherwise unpopular Vice President Kamala Harris fared better in the matchup with Trump than her boss, trailing by 47% to 45%. And Biden is down 6 percentage points to Trump. While I take your point that, you know, it is for the Democratic National Convention to decide what happens next, not for the House representatives or the, you know, members of the Senate. But does this poll, do the findings of this poll surprise you in any way that, you know, even somebody with you know, lower approval ratings than President Biden till not too long ago, Vice President Kamala Harris is now preferred over him and actually seems to close the gap significantly with Donald Trump in this poll?
Well, I think it indicates to you that, well, there is a lot of unhappiness with Trump as well. I mean, one of the things that most polls indicate is that the bulk of American voters are unhappy with both candidates. They would prefer almost anybody else than that. Kamala Harris has been unpopular, but it is not impossible. I mean, if you look at the fact that Trump was also in some of his public speeches become incoherent at times and talked complete gibberish, it's not a surprise that there's a fair amount of skepticism about Trump as well. I think Harris is just getting a bit of a jump. She's still very unpopular. She's not a very good speaker. Virtually nobody who's met her has come out impressed. But compared to the two old men, it's not impossible that she would be seen as a viable alternative. But keep in mind that Trump has not chosen a vice presidential candidate yet. And if he was to choose one who would be suitably credible, it's not impossible that that person would then start to lead in the polls. I think Harris right now is getting a bit of a jump because of the shock at seeing Biden showing himself to be so weak as a candidate. But generally speaking, Harris is not seen as a person who can defeat Trump. Because remember, it is not decided by popular vote in America. Every Democratic candidate for the past, I think, 6 or 7 elections has always won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College. And the Electoral College, because it gives is biased in favor of small states, if you wish, and the bulk of the small states, especially in the Midwest and the Rocky Mountains, are Republican strongholds. Republicans win the Electoral College even though they lose the popular vote. Kamala Harris on the Electoral College would be a more interesting number to look at, and I suspect she would trail Trump quite considerably. Biden also was trailing, I should add. But what has happened after that, there were 6 swing states that were going to decide this election. After that debate, it is now 9 swing states. 3 more states have essentially become, which were considered safe by the Democrats, West Virginia, New Hampshire, and so on, have now become open following that. I don't know, I haven't seen the numbers that indicate what Kamala Harris would do in the Electoral College. I don't think she'd do very well, but quite possibly. But among Democrats, it's very clear that Democratic voters are very nervous about Biden and would prefer almost anybody, definitely Kamala Harris. Some people have shown votes saying that polls that said Michelle Obama would be an even more powerful candidate, for example, or Gavin Newsom of California, or Gretchen Whitmer, Minnesota. But those are that's the story right now. But it's the Electoral College that is the real call in this. That deserves the election. I don't think Harris would do better than Biden on the Electoral College, but I haven't seen numbers on that front.
Fair point. Before I take this back to Professor Srivastav, let me ask you, Mr. Chaudhary, as we know, tonight, President Biden will talk with the Democratic governors and and we are told some congressmen and congresswomen too, virtually and in person. If you had to take a guess for us, what do you think these governors are likely to tell President Biden behind closed doors? Are they likely to say, President Biden, we still have faith in you. We just need to hear from you that you're still up to the job and can defeat Trump? Or do you think that, they could very well say, for God's sake, for the party's sake, and for the country's sake, we urge you to step aside and make way for another candidate?
Well, I would say that they would say something close to the second message, but they would not say step aside. They would just say, whatever you do, look at the numbers, look at what is happening on the ground, and make a call for the good of the party, that you are here, you chose to run, you came out of retirement 5 years ago, only because you despised President Trump. The idea of a President Trump was so abhorrent to you. Given that, and given that it should remain your priority, we urge you to think very closely what is the best way to defeat Trump, not worry too much about whether you get a second presidency. Because fundamentally, until now, the assumption has been that Biden, and at least Biden's camp has been telling him, you're still the best chance to defeat Trump. I think that would be the message, but I don't think they'd ask him to step aside. That would be considered, I think that would be pushing the envelope, if you wish. Even Obama, when he called him, spoke to him, but at the end of it said, look, if you want me to be with you, I'm with you. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
So my guess is that's what they would ask. Tell him, your number one purpose in joining the presidential run, becoming president, was to defeat Trump. What's the best way? Think to yourself, what's the best way to stop Trump from coming back?
I think that's a very interesting point. Do you agree with that, Professor Srivastav, that while most of these Democratic governors may not want to sound disrespectful and directly tell President Biden to step aside, they are likely to drop more than enough hints that, in the larger interest of the party in the country, he should take the right decision, do the right thing. And as Pramit Pal Chaudhary says, if the most important goal for the Democratic Party as well as for President Biden personally is to ensure that Trump does not return to the White House for a second term, well, then, he must give his party a fighting chance. That's something that he's got to understand.
Well, Neha, this was a bad night, as the White House spokesperson clearly recognized. But in my assessment, before going for any such kind of request, giving through any this kind of argument that it is essential to defeat Trump and how to defeat him should be the priority, etc. I think such kind of arguments, such kind of points, which could be put forward by the leaders of the Democratic Party establishment. But in my assessment, they will wait for another 15 days, another 2 weeks, and they will see what kind of performance President Biden does before various other interactions which is coming up, whether it is an interview with the CBC or several such interactions. And if in those interactions he performed well, he did not make such blunders with what he did in the presidential debate, then I think such kind of argument will not be put forward. It will be it will be put aside. I said those questions will be put aside instead of him being put aside. So I think it is essential, as I said in the last point also, that President Biden ought to perform well in the upcoming interactions. If he does not perform well in the upcoming interactions, then after 15 days, there could be such a possibility. Then the leaders of the Democratic establishment will put forward.
Interesting. So you believe that that hint may not come as early as today, that most Democrats would want to give President Biden another 15 days. They will probably want to wait to see how he performs during the Friday night interview and, at some of his other public appearances. However, the trouble for the Democratic Party is that time is running out. not just ahead of the elections, but even ahead of the Democratic National Convention that is scheduled to be held in the month of August. What's going to happen next is anybody's guess. While this does promise to be a fascinating election that the entire world is going to watch very closely, at the moment it is safe to say that the Democrats have plenty to worry about. On that note, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Professor Sanjeev Srivastav, thank you so much to both of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now get you some other news. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has urged Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to consider a ceasefire to accelerate an end to the war with Russia. He said he wanted a big cooperation agreement with Kiev.
In a surprise visit to Kyiv on Tuesday, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban gave a clear message on how to end Russia's war in Ukraine.
I asked the President to think about whether we could reverse the order and speed up peace talks by making a ceasefire first. A ceasefire connected to a deadline would give a chance to speed up peace talks. I explored this possibility with the President, and I am grateful for his honest answers and negotiation.
Orban has the warmest relations of any EU leader with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The outspoken critic of Western military aid to Ukraine held talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky during his first trip to Kyiv in more than a decade.
We would like to make the relationship between the two countries better. We would like to make a broad bilateral agreement with Ukraine, similar to the ones we already have made with our neighbours. We would be happy to take part in the modernization of Ukraine's economy. We would like an ordered framework for this.
He also said he valued Kyiv's push to promote Zelensky's vision of peace at an international summit in June. The Ukrainian president, who spoke before Orban, did not respond to those comments. Ties between the neighbors came under heavy strain after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. Budapest has often opposed the European Union efforts to support Kyiv. Earlier this year, it took EU leaders weeks to break Orban's veto to extend over 50 billion euros in new aid to the war-torn country. Under Orban, Hungary has repeatedly accused Ukraine of curbing the rights of roughly 150,000 ethnic Hungarians living in the far west of Ukraine. Ukraine denies this and says it is open to addressing any concerns. Kyiv is keen to support Hungary's backing, as it relies heavily on financial and military support from the 27-member EU, where unanimity is needed for many decisions.
Opponents of France's national rally have stepped up their bid to block the far-right party from power as more candidates have agreed to pull out of this weekend's runoff election to avoid splitting the opposition vote. Here's the story.
Opponents of France's national rally stepped up their bid to block the far-right party of Marine Le Pen from power on Tuesday, as more than 200 candidates agreed to pull out of this weekend's runoff election, according to local media reports. The dropouts include those who finished in third place in the first round of voting, and they are quitting the race as part of a strategy to create a Republican front to block the anti-immigrant Eurosceptic party. Le Pen's party came out well ahead in Sunday's first-round vote after President Emmanuel Macron's gamble on a snap election backfired, leaving his centrist camp in a lowly third-place position behind the national rally and a hastily formed left-wing alliance. Still, it was far from clear National Rally could win the 289 seats needed for a majority, and that was before the coalition maneuvering of the last 24 hours. But But National Rally lawmakers, including Laure Lavalette, who won her race in the election's first round, remained confident.
I think that the French are very disappointed with these dealings, these behind-the-scenes dealings, and I am convinced that we will obviously have the absolute majority to be able to truly change the daily lives of the French.
The Republican front approach has worked before, such as in 2002 when voters of all stripes rallied behind Jacques Chirac to defeat Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie, in a presidential contest. However, it is not certain voters these days are willing to follow guidance from political leaders on where to place their vote, while Marine Le Pen's efforts to soften the image of her party has made it less of a pariah for millions.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.
When we talk about India, unfortunately the country has the highest burden of road crash fatalities.
तो लगभग 76% लोग pedestrians और two-wheeler वाले हैं जिनकी death हुई है.
While the highways are getting better in India, the local roads, the city roads, the town roads, these need to be improved.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
The confidence is certainly back in the market.
Do tighten your seat belt so that you can withstand volatility.
I have one humble request to all the viewers of News 9 is that please don't go, there will be a lot of choppiness, there will be a lot of volatility. Look at long term, don't look at short term. Buy quality, don't buy quantity, and wish you all the very best.
हमारा टाइम आ गया है और रहेगा.
This and more. Streaming on News 9.